Previously, we saw how a kiss in the dark transformed two enemies into accomplices, and how the discovery of a security camera put everything at risk in the hands of a sadistic boss. Now, see how we face the biggest battle of our lives. The frozen image on the television screen seemed to mock us, transforming the most beautiful and honest moment of my life into a dirty weapon in the hands of that despicable man. Mr. Yee. Sterling didn't turn off the device. He left the scene of our kiss paused there, in black and white, like a hunting trophy hung on the wall, forcing us to stare at our exposed intimacy under his clinical and sadistic gaze. The air conditioning in the room seemed to have dropped to freezing temperatures, but the cold I felt came from inside, a nauseating mix of shame and dread that made my stomach turn. He stood up and got straight to the point, without legal jargon. He said that, under normal circumstances, this would be immediate termination for cause. He emphasized how conservative the local business community was, and how a scandal in the dead archive would destroy Allison's reputation and my chance of getting any job in the city. He knew exactly where to hit, her pride and my need to pay the bills. It was then that the indecent proposal came, masked as a second chance. He said he could forget the video and delete the files from the server, provided we agreed to a restructuring of roles. In practice, he wanted to demote us, increase our workload to inhumane levels, and worse, he wanted Allison to sign some documents taking the blame for administrative errors that, I knew, were his. It was clear extortion, our obedience and silence in exchange for our dignity. I was about to cry, feeling the weight of injustice crush my lungs, when I felt something brush my hand under the meeting table. At first, I thought it was a nervous spasm, or my imagination, but the touch became firm. Allison's hand, cold and trembling, sought mine in the dark gap between the chairs, intertwining her fingers with mine with surprising strength. That invisible gesture changed everything. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a declaration of alliance. By holding my hand, Allison was telling me, without words, that we were no longer rivals, that we were in that sinking boat together, and that she wouldn't let go. The energy that flowed from her touch to me was like a shot of adrenaline, dissipating the fear and lighting a flame of revolt I didn't know I possessed. I squeezed her hand back, firming our silent pact. I looked at Allison and saw she felt the shift too. She took a deep breath, that controlled sigh I learned to recognize in the storage room, and for the first time in that meeting, she spoke. Her voice didn't shake. She told Mr. Sterling, with cutting coldness, that we needed time to think about his generous offer and that we would give the answer the next day. Sterling seemed surprised by the audacity, expecting tears or immediate begging, but Allison's defiant look made him retreat for an instant. He laughed, a dry and disdainful sound, and said he would give us 24 hours to get real. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he told us to leave, going back to looking at the paused video on the screen as if it were his favorite TV show. We stood up in unison, not letting go of hands until the last possible second before becoming visible. We left the president's office walking side by side, the sound of our heels echoing in the hallway like a war march. I no longer felt like the invisible, frightened secretary. I felt part of something bigger, protected by the woman walking beside me. When we reached the elevator, away from his eyes and ears, the mask fell, but not into despair. Allison turned to me, blue eyes shining with a fierce determination that left me breathless. She didn't cry, didn't lament. She just said, voice low and dangerous, "He doesn't know who he messed with, Hannah. Nobody threatens what is mine." And in that mine, I knew she wasn't just talking about her career. We left the corporate building like two fugitives, walking fast under the pale sun trying to pierce the gray clouds of the storm's aftermath. We didn't exchange a word until we were 3 blocks away, far enough from the oppressive shadow of the Sterling office. Allison guided the way, not to the sophisticated restaurants where she used to have lunch with clients, but to a small, discreet bistro on a side street. a place where the leather on the chairs was worn and the smell of fresh coffee brought a domestic comfort we desperately needed. We sat at a corner table, away from the window and curious eyes. For the first time in 3 years of forced coexistence, there wasn't a conference table, a stack of documents, or a rigid hierarchy separating us. There was just a checkered tablecloth and the heavy silence of everything that still needed to be said. I watched Allison take off her sunglasses and saw the deep fatigue marked under her blue eyes, a vulnerability the daylight made even more touching than in the dark of the storage room. She ordered a bottle of water and 2 strong coffees, dismissing the waiter with a quick wave. When we were alone again, she didn't run from my gaze. The defensive posture had disappeared, and in its place, I saw a woman dismantling her defenses brick by brick. She stretched her hand across the table, in a hesitant movement, and touched the tips of my fingers, a light touch that served as a request for permission to enter my life. Her voice came out steady. Allison didn't give empty excuses. She looked into my eyes and asked for forgiveness for every time she made me feel small. She confessed she attacked me because I was the only thing in that office she couldn't control. Her hatred was, in truth, admiration distorted by the fear of connecting. Hearing that, said with such honesty, lifted an enormous weight off my shoulders. I felt a lump in my throat and, on impulse, turned my hand to hold hers firmly. I told her I had already forgiven everything the moment she let me hug her in the dark. I said I understood the game we needed to play to survive in that chauvinist environment, where women are taught to compete instead of collaborate. Allison squeezed my hand hard, and I saw a solitary tear run down her face, which she wiped quickly with the back of her other hand, in a gesture of someone who still doesn't know how to handle public emotion well. Lunch arrived, but the food was barely touched. We were starving for something else, truth. We talked about our lives outside those glass walls. I discovered Allison hated Japanese food, which she always pretended to love at business lunches, and that her secret dream was to own a small bookstore in a quiet coastal town. I told her about my loud family in the suburbs, about my taste for old music, and how I saved every penny to try to go to design school, which I never started. With every new revelation, the image of the terrible boss dissolved, giving way to a fascinating, cultured, and funny woman, with whom I could spend hours talking without seeing the time pass. The connection born in the panic of the storage room was solidifying in the calm of that bistro. I realized the kiss hadn't been an isolated accident. It was the inevitable consequence of 2 souls who, even fighting, had always been orbiting around each other. But the reality of Mr. Sterling still hung over us like a black cloud. When the subject finally returned to the blackmail, Allison's expression changed. Sadness gave way to that cold determination I saw in the elevator. She told me, in no uncertain terms, that she wouldn't sign anything and wouldn't accept being demoted. She asked if I trusted her, if I was willing to enter a war that could get ugly, but was the only chance to leave there with our dignity intact. I looked at that incredible woman, who was risking a meteoric career not to bow to an abuser, and knew I would follow her to hell if needed. I answered yes, that I trusted her more than anyone. Allison smiled, a dangerous and beautiful smile, and said Sterling had made a fatal mistake. He thought the video would divide us through shame, but actually, he gave us the perfect reason to unite. She revealed to me quietly that during the years she worked as his right hand, she saw a lot. Wrong things, embezzlement, covered-up harassment. She had never said anything out of fear and ambition, but now her loyalty had changed sides. She didn't have concrete proof yet, but she knew where to look. The plan wasn't just to defend ourselves, it was to bring him down. We paid the bill and left the bistro holding hands, letting go only when we spotted the mirrored facade of the building. But the feeling of being orphaned didn't return. As we walked to the entrance, we exchanged a complicit look, a shared secret worth more than any salary. We were going back in there. We were going to pretend submission for now. But under the table, literally and figuratively, we would be holding hands, ready for the counterattack. We returned to the office that afternoon, not as defeated employees, but as actresses stepping onto the stage for the performance of our lives. Mr. Sterling, in his blind arrogance, interpreted our silence and lowered heads as total submission, without realizing Allison's docility was as fake as the teeth in his smile. We accepted the new working conditions, which included extended hours and humiliating filing tasks, an irony he found delicious, sending us back to the place where it all started. But inside, we were vibrating with the anticipation of the strike. The routine over the next 2 weeks turned into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. During the day, under the merciless light of fluorescent lamps and security cameras, we kept the regulatory distance. I served coffee, she reviewed contracts, and we barely exchanged glances when anyone was around. But the air between us was charged, crackling with static electricity that made the hairs on my arm stand up every time she passed my desk, and left a trail of that citrus perfume in the air. The real action began after 6 p.m, when the office emptied out and the boss went to his business dinners. It was at this moment that the authoritarian official and the invisible secretary became accomplices to a perfect crime. Allison used her administrator passwords, which he stupidly forgot to revoke, to access old balance sheets and encrypted emails he exchanged with shell companies. I stood guard in the hallway, heart in my mouth, pretending to organize folders while my ears tracked any elevator sound. I discovered a facet of Allison that left me fascinated and, I confess, a little aroused. Seeing her work against him, with that sharp and focused intelligence, was the sexiest thing I had ever seen. She unraveled tax fraud and misappropriation of funds with the same precision with which she previously humiliated interns. One of those nights, she called me to look at the computer screen, pointing to a suspicious bank transfer dating back 5 years. Our faces were close, illuminated only by the blue glow of the monitor, and the celebration for discovering the proof transformed in the blink of an eye into an urgent and silent kiss right there, in the boss's chair. Those stolen moments were our fuel. Kissing Allison in the forbidden room, knowing we could be caught at any second, had a taste of revenge and freedom. The adrenaline of danger acted like a potent aphrodisiac, making every touch more intense, every whisper more loaded with meaning. We were building our intimacy in the eye of the hurricane, transforming fear into desire. But our true refuge wasn't the office, but her car. A black sedan with tinted windows parked in the basement garage. Since we left very late, she insisted on giving me a ride to the suburbs. Those 20-minute trips across the illuminated bridge became the highlight of my day. There, inside the bubble of leather and soft car audio, we could just be Hannah and Allison, girlfriends who hadn't made the title official yet, but who already acted like it. It was on one of those rides, stopped in a traffic jam caused by an accident on the expressway, that the final barrier fell. Allison turned off the radio, turned to me and, with a sweetness that contrasted with the coldness of the day, took my hand and brought it to her lips, kissing the palm and each of my fingers. She told me she had never felt so alive, that my presence had brought color to her gray world. She confessed she was afraid of what would come after the resignation, but the fear of losing me was infinitely greater. I caressed her face, feeling the soft skin under my fingers, and replied that we would figure it out, that I had already lived with much less, and could teach her how to be happy without the unlimited corporate card. We laughed, a light and complicit laugh, and there, under the red lights of the brake lights of the cars ahead, we kissed with a calmness that didn't exist in the office. It wasn't a kiss of escape or desperation. It was a kiss of promise, of building a future. That night, Allison didn't just drop me at my door. For the first time, she entered my world. My house was simple, an old townhouse with creaky hardwood floors and mismatched furniture, very different from the minimalist penthouse where I imagined she lived. I was tense, ashamed of my simplicity, but she entered taking off her high heels and sighing with relief, as if taking off a tight costume. She sat on my worn chenille sofa, accepted a cup of chamomile tea, and looked at my family photos on the shelf with genuine respect. In that domestic environment, without the suits and heavy makeup, Allison seemed younger, lighter. We ate sandwiches sitting on the living room floor, laughing at silly things and planning, between one kiss and another, what Mr. Sterling's face would look like when the bomb went off. The domestic intimacy was even better than the office tension. Seeing Allison washing dishes in my small sink, with the sleeves of her silk shirt rolled up, made me absolutely certain I wanted to wake up next to her every day. We slept together that night, in my double bed that took up almost the entire room, hugging in a way that seemed our bodies had been molded for each other. When the alarm clock rang the next morning, bringing the reality of the final battle, I felt no fear. Allison was sleeping with her head on my chest, and her calm breathing gave me the strength of an army. We had the evidence copied onto a flash drive that was in her purse. We had each other's love, and we had the certainty that this would be the last day we would step into Sterling and Associates as submissive employees. It was time for the final show. The ride up the elevator that morning had a completely different flavor. If on the previous Friday I felt like I was going to the slaughterhouse, that Wednesday I felt like a soldier wearing her armor for the final battle. Allison was beside me, impeccable in a white suit that seemed to defy the moral filth of that place, holding the black leather briefcase with a firmness that turned her knuckles white. We didn't exchange words during the trip, just a quick look in the mirror, where I saw reflected the same certainty burning in my chest. No matter what happened in that room, we would leave there free. When we entered the executive antechamber, the silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic sound of phones ringing, ignored by the substitute secretary who looked terrified. Mr. Sterling awaited us with the door open, sitting in his armchair like a king on his throne, twirling an expensive pen between his fingers with an air of rehearsed boredom. He didn't even bother to greet us, just pointed to the chairs in front of him, expecting us to sit with heads bowed, ready to accept the crumbs he was willing to offer. But we didn't sit. We remained standing, side by side, forming an insurmountable human barrier in front of his desk. Allison took a step forward, and the change in the room's atmosphere was instant. The temperature dropped, but not from the air conditioning. It was from the cutting coldness with which she stared at him, without blinking, without looking away, sustaining the weight of his authority, and returning it double. I saw Sterling's smug smile falter for a microsecond, the first crack in his confidence upon realizing the script he wrote in his head wouldn't be followed. He tried to regain control, asking with a gentle voice if we had already signed the role readjustment terms, and if we were ready to apologize for the shameful behavior in the archive. He made a motion to reach for the television remote, a veiled threat to show the video again, trying to use our intimacy as a whip to tame us. It was the last time he tried to use that dirty card because Allison gave him no time to complete the gesture. She didn't waste time citing penal codes. She slid the flash drive across the desk and was lethal. Here are our resignation letters, and on this device is the proof of all your shell accounts and embezzlement from the last 5 years. A copy is already scheduled for the district attorney if our severance doesn't hit today. The powerful man shrank in his chair. There was no room for negotiation. Either he signed our freedom, or he left there in handcuffs. He tried to stammer an explanation, tried to speak of a misunderstanding, but Allison raised her hand, ending the conversation. She said we didn't want explanations, we just wanted what was rightfully ours, and for him to sign the receipt of the resignations now. With shaking hands, Mr. Sterling took the pen he was previously twirling with arrogance and signed the papers, without even reading the contents, desperate for us to leave and take the danger with us. He didn't look us in the eyes as he handed back the signed copies. His defeat was complete and humiliating, sealed inside the 4 glass walls he used to flaunt power. We took the papers and turned to leave, without saying, "Thank you," or "goodbye." The walk to the door was the lightest of my life. I felt as if I had taken a backpack of rocks off my back. Allison opened the door for me, and in a gesture that shocked the secretary peeking from outside, held my hand openly. There were no more secrets, no more fear of cameras. We crossed the central office with heads held high, under the curious looks and whispers of colleagues who realized something monumental had just happened. We didn't look back. We left behind years of humiliation, manufactured rivalry, and the toxicity of that environment. The sound of our heels on the marble floor sounded like music, the rhythm of our liberation. When the automatic glass doors opened on the ground floor and the street wind hit our faces, I breathed deep, filling my lungs with the polluted avenue air, which, to me, smelled like flowers. The sun had finally beaten the clouds and illuminated the bay. Allison stopped on the sidewalk, looked at the tall building behind us one last time, and then turned to me. The smile she gave me was radiant, free of any weight. She squeezed my hand and said, "It's over, Hannah. Now it's just us." And I knew in that instant that the true happy ending wasn't the money or the revenge, but the freedom to be able to love her in the light of day. The first morning as unemployed tasted strange, a mix of a lazy Sunday with a forbidden Monday. For the first time in 3 years, the alarm didn't ring at 6 a.m, and I didn't need to run to catch the crowded bus across the bridge. I woke up with sunlight entering through the slats of my wooden bedroom window, illuminating dust dancing in the air, and for a brief second, I felt the habitual panic of being late. But then, I felt the weight of Allison's arm on my waist and her calm breathing on my neck, and reality hit me. We had jumped off the cliff, and miraculously, we had learned to fly. Allison was still sleeping, her face devoid of that constant tension marking her expressions at the office. Without makeup, without the tight bun, and without the executive armor, she seemed younger and infinitely more beautiful. I lay there observing her for a while, trying to understand how my life had turned upside down, or right side up, in such a short time. I had no job, no guaranteed salary at the end of the month, but I had the woman of my dreams in my bed. It was a risky trade, one that would give my mother a heart attack, but one I would do again without blinking. When she woke up, there wasn't that moment of disorientation. She opened her eyes, found mine, and smiled, a slow and lazy smile that would never be seen in the corridors of Sterling and Associates. We didn't talk about lawyers, about Mr. Sterling, or the DA. We just wrapped ourselves in the sheets, enjoying the freedom of having no schedule, no boss, no one timing our steps. Breakfast was made with 4 hands, with her burning the toast and laughing about it, a domestic scene that seemed banal, but for us was revolutionary. We decided not to stay home ruminating on the future. Allison suggested going to the beach, a place where the open ocean and white sand seemed to cleanse the soul. Seeing Allison in jeans, a basic t-shirt, and sneakers, walking on the soft sand, was a surreal experience. She, who always lived in climate-controlled and sterile environments, seemed like a child discovering the world, feeling the wind mess up the blonde hair she always kept so disciplined. We walked for miles along the water's edge, with the noise of the waves drowning out any negative thoughts. It was there, with the infinite horizon in front of us, that the financial reality began to sink in for her. Allison stopped suddenly, looking at the sea, and confessed she was terrified. She said she had never been without a badge, without a corporate surname, without the security of a fat monthly deposit. She felt naked, without identity, asking who she was if not the executive director. I held her face between my hands, forcing her to look at me, and not the abyss. I told her she was Allison, the intelligent, brave, and fair woman who had the audacity to take down a giant. I said we would figure out the money, that I knew how to live with little, and could teach her how to save, how to shop at discount grocery stores, how to live real life. I said her identity wasn't in the title, but in the character she showed when she defended both of us. She smiled, a little more relieved, and asked me what we were now. The question hung in the salty air. We were no longer colleagues, no longer boss and subordinate, no longer accomplices to a corporate crime. I interlaced my fingers in hers and replied, heart racing, that I would very much like for us to be girlfriends. Not seeing each other, Not friends with benefits, but real girlfriends. The kind who share the bill, problems, and dreams. Her answer was a kiss. Not a hidden kiss in the dark or rushed in the car, but a kiss in the light of day, in front of surfers, families, and dogs passing on the sand. Allison kissed me with pride, claiming that title for herself. When we separated, she said, "My girlfriend," out loud, testing the sound of the words, and laughed, saying it sounded much better than "my assistant." The feeling of freedom that day was intoxicating. We had lunch at a simple seafood shack, paying with the cash we had in our wallets, laughing at the irony of being poor, but happy. Allison turned off her corporate cell phone, which she would still have to return, and ignored dozens of messages from curious colleagues wanting gossip. The world outside could be on fire. The office could be in chaos without her. But there, sharing a portion of shrimp, we were at peace. However, the euphoria of the leap of faith has a short shelf life when the gravity of adult life kicks in. We returned to my house in the late afternoon, tired from the sun and happiness, and found reality waiting for us in the mailbox. They were bills, electricity, water, internet, cold and bureaucratic papers that didn't care about our love or our moral victory. Allison picked up one of the envelopes, the electric bill, and looked at the amount with a strange expression. For her, that amount was negligible, the price of a lunch. But she knew that now, without a predicted salary, every penny counted. Fear returned to shadow her eyes, not panic fear, but the pragmatic worry of someone who always had everything and now didn't know what the next day would be like. We sat on the sofa, the romance bubble being slightly punctured by the need for survival. I grabbed a notebook and a pen. I looked at her and said, "Okay, girlfriend." We took down Mr. Sterling. Now we need to come up with a plan so we don't starve. Allison took a deep breath, took the pen from my hand, and with that shine of competence I loved so much, wrote at the top of the blank sheet, "The New Empire." And so, between fear and hope, we began to draw our future. The so-called New Empire Allison wrote on paper wasn't born in a mirrored building with central air, but on the wobbly table of my dining room, surrounded by cheap coffee mugs and piles of notes made on the back of bill envelopes. The first few months were a trial by fire for our sanity, and mainly for our relationship. We discovered the hard way that freedom has a high cost, and that the romanticism of living on love doesn't pay rent or fill the fridge. The influence of Mr. Sterling, even weakened, still prowled the city like a ghost. Allison, with all her impeccable resume and management awards, received 3 rejections in a row from firms that mysteriously decided she was overqualified for the positions. I watched frustration corrode her self-esteem with every rejection email. The woman who used to give orders was now sitting on my sofa, in pajamas at 2 p.m, staring at the void with that look of someone who lost their compass. Financial life became daily gymnastics. We had to sell her luxury car, as the maintenance and gas were incompatible with our new reality. It was a painful day seeing that status symbol being taken away, but Allison held my hand and said she preferred riding the bus with me than crying alone in a Mercedes. We started living on the money from that sale and my savings from years, counting every cent at the supermarket, swapping famous brands for generics, and learning to stretch what we had in the pantry. There were moments of tension, of course. I remember a night we fought over a forgotten electric bill. Allison, used to having secretaries to resolve these trivialities, felt attacked when I demanded organization. The discussion escalated, voices were raised, and the fear of scarcity spoke louder. But, unlike the office, there was nowhere to run. We ended the fight crying, hugged on the kitchen floor, apologizing and promising we wouldn't let money, or the lack of it, destroy what we had conquered. It was on that night, between sobs and salty kisses, that the turning point happened. Allison lifted her head, wiped her face, and said we were thinking small. She said we shouldn't look for jobs. We should create our job. She had the strategic vision, knowledge of laws, and the hidden network of contacts. I had the organization, operational discipline, and ability to deal with real people, not just numbers. We decided to open a management consultancy for small businesses, focused on helping family businesses professionalize, exactly the opposite of the cold corporate world we came from. The company name was a source of laughter and debate, but we ended up opting for something simple, linking our initials. We transformed my second bedroom, which served as a clutter depot, into our makeshift office. We painted the walls on a weekend, set up desks with wooden sawhorses, and bought 2 used office chairs at a thrift store. The work dynamic between us was fascinating. Allison, who I thought was just a bossy chief, revealed herself to be an incredibly patient mentor. She taught me about cash flow, pricing, and market strategy, treating me like an equal partner, not an assistant. In exchange, I taught her empathy with clients, listening to the stories behind the numbers, and celebrating small victories, like getting a discount on office supplies. We worked 12, 14 hours a day. There was no glamour, no designer suits. We worked in t-shirts and shorts, hair tied up any old way, sweating in the summer heat because we didn't have air conditioning. But there was genuine joy in that fatigue. We stopped in the middle of the afternoon to drink coffee and kiss leaning against the doorframe, a constant reminder of why we were doing all that. Intimacy grew in the trenches. I knew the smell of her stress, and she knew exactly where to massage my shoulders when I locked up with tension. Our entrepreneurial honeymoon had its first big test when the money from the car sale started running out, and no client had signed a contract yet. Panic knocked on the door again. Allison suggested maybe she should try going back to the corporate market, swallow her pride, but I forbade her. I said I believed in her, believed in us, and we would eat rice and eggs if necessary, but we wouldn't give up on our dream. My faith was rewarded on a rainy Tuesday. The phone, which spent days silent, rang. It was the owner of a neighborhood bakery chain who had heard of us through a recommendation from my uncle. She was on the brink of bankruptcy and needed help organizing the accounts. Allison answered the phone with the posture of a multinational CEO, even though she was barefoot in my living room. The meeting was at our dining table. Allison shone. She dissected the client's problems with frightening clarity, but with a kindness I had never seen before. I complimented with practical organization solutions. The woman left there enchanted, signing a modest contract. But for us, it was worth millions. When the door closed, Allison and I screamed, jumped, and hugged as if we had won the lottery. We celebrated with cheap pizza and a $5 wine, sitting on the floor of our office. Allison raised the plastic cup and made a toast. She said she had closed million-dollar contracts in glass rooms, but none had given her the pride that those first $1,000 from the bakery did. She looked at me with watery eyes and said I was the best partner and the best woman she could have asked God for. That night, we made love not with the urgency of the forbidden, but with the deep gratitude of someone building, brick by brick, a castle no one can knock down. That modest contract with the neighborhood bakery was the stone that started the avalanche. In the months that followed, the reputation of our small consultancy, born between coffee cups and piles of paper on my dining table, began to spread through the city like a valuable secret. We discovered the market was hungry not just for cold numbers and aggressive strategies, but for human service, something Allison and I offered like no one else. Word of mouth worked better than any expensive marketing campaign, and soon my personal phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls for help from stores, restaurants, and small local factories. My house, which was previously a silent refuge, transformed into the headquarters of a revolution. The living room was officially taken over by folders, whiteboards with colorful schedules, and the constant sound of keyboards typing. There was a chaotic and wonderful energy in the air, a mix of printer ink, smell with the aroma of homemade lunch we insisted on preparing together. For the first time in life, Monday wasn't a day of mourning, but a day of new opportunities. Seeing Allison work in this new environment was like watching a bird that finally learned to use its wings outside the cage. The woman who previously used her intelligence to intimidate subordinates and hide fraud for a corrupt boss, now used the same brilliance to save the livelihoods of real families. I saw her on the phone, gesturing with enthusiasm, explaining to a mechanic shop owner how he could reinvest profit, and my eyes filled with tears of pride. She wasn't the authoritarian official anymore. She was a force of nature, passionate and accessible. Our professional dynamic fit like the pieces of a Swiss watch, but with warmth. Allison was the visionary, the one who dreamed big, wanted to expand, create franchises, and dominate the market. I was the solid ground, the one who organized processes, calmed her anxiety, and ensured we didn't bite off more than we could chew. Of course, there was friction. We had heated discussions about investing in software or saving emergency money. But the difference was that now, we ended fights with kisses and laughter, not with passive-aggressive memos. I remember a specific afternoon, a typical rainy Friday, where we were bogged down with work up to our necks. The deadline to deliver a new client's planning was blowing up, and the tension was palpable. We were sitting side by side on the floor, surrounded by printed spreadsheets, with exhaustion weighing on our eyelids. Allison huffed with frustration, throwing a pen away, about to have one of those perfectionism crises I knew so well. Without saying a word, I dragged myself to her and started massaging her tense shoulders. I felt her muscles relax under my touch. She closed her eyes, let the air out slowly, and tipped her head back, resting it on my chest. There, in the middle of chaos and deadlines, we created an island of peace. I whispered we would make it, as we always did, and she turned her face to kiss me. It was a slow kiss, tasting of cold coffee and gratitude, which recharged our batteries better than any energy drink. The intimacy of working with the woman I loved was a daily gift. There was no need to hide touches, fake formality, or wait until 6 p.m. to show affection. If Allison did something brilliant, I kissed her. If I solved a complex problem, she hugged me around the waist while I washed breakfast dishes. This freedom to be competent professionals and passionate girlfriends at the same time was our greatest revenge against the gray world we came from. Financially, things began to change color. The red of debt gave way to the blue of stability. I remember vividly the day we paid the last installment of the loan we took to buy better computers. Allison looked at the bank balance on the screen, then looked at me and started laughing, a laugh of pure relief. That night we went to our favorite restaurant, that bistro where we had lunch on Resignation Day, and ordered the most expensive wine on the list, not for ostentation, but to celebrate that we were masters of our own destiny. As months passed, it became clear my dining room could no longer hold the size of our dreams. We needed to hire people. We needed interns, a receptionist, more consultants. Sterling and Associates seemed like a distant and dusty memory, something that happened in another life. Our company, H&A Consulting, pulsed with life and growth. On a Sunday night while planning the next week, Allison stopped typing and stared at me with a serious expression. I got worried, asking if something was wrong. She shook her head, eyes shining with emotion. She said she spent her whole life chasing titles and bonuses, thinking that was success. But she had never been as happy as she was now, working in jeans, earning less, for now, and having me by her side. I stood up, went to her, and pulled her onto my lap. We stayed there, hugged in the comfortable silence of our home, listening to rain hit the window. I felt her heart beat against mine, calm and strong, and knew we had won. Not just the ex-boss, not just bankruptcy, but we had conquered the fear of being who we were. That night, before sleeping, Allison whispered she had seen an ad for a commercial floor for rent downtown. A place with a view of the water, but without oppressive glass walls. A place where we could build the culture we wanted. I smiled in the dark, squeezed her hand and said, "Let's visit tomorrow." The future was knocking at the door, and this time, we had the key. 5 years have passed since we left that mirrored building carrying only a box of belongings and a flash drive full of evidence. Today, I stand in front of a glass wall. but the view I have doesn't oppress me anymore. On the contrary, it belongs to me. We are on the 10th floor of a historic building in the city center, inaugurating the new headquarters of H&A Consulting, which now occupies the entire floor. The smell of fresh paint mixes with the aroma of champagne being served to our 30 employees and clients who came to celebrate this achievement with us, which, back then, seemed impossible. I look at the room and see a corporate culture that is the absolute opposite of what we lived. There are no whispers of fear, no harassment, no unfair competition. I hear loud laughter coming from the break room, see interns talking as equals with managers, and feel a pride that swells my chest. We proved it is possible to succeed without losing your soul. And that kindness is a much more powerful management tool than terror. We built an empire, yes, but an empire made of happy people. Allison is in the center of the room, making a toast. She wears a light blue linen jumpsuit, light and elegant, very different from the rigid black suits she used as armor. Her hair is loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and she laughs at something a client said, throwing her head back with a freedom that moves me every time I see it. She isn't the authoritarian official anymore. She is just Allison, my wife, my partner, and the most incredible woman I have ever met. As for Mr. Sterling, fate and justice took care of him. The evidence we delivered was devastating. He lost his license with the Bar Association, faced criminal charges, and saw his family name dragged through the mud in the local papers. The Sterling firm closed its doors 2 years ago, bankrupt and forgotten. Sometimes I feel a pang of pity, but then I remember how he treated us, and the pity turns into the certainty that we reaped exactly what we sowed. He planted fear and reaped loneliness. We planted courage and reaped a family. I feel a warm hand land on my waist and the familiar citrus perfume envelop me. Allison approaches me, escaping the guests a bit to have a moment of our own. She rests her forehead on my shoulder and sighs, content. She whispers in my ear that she can't wait to get home, take off her shoes, and play with our dog, a mutt we adopted last year who is the king of our apartment. The domestic life we built is my greatest treasure, much more valuable than any $1 million contract we signed at this table. She lifts her face and looks at me with those blue eyes that, in the past, scared me, and today are my safe harbor. Allison says she was watching me from across the room, and that I continue to be the most beautiful woman in the world, the only one who can calm her with just a look. I smile and tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, feeling the gold band on my finger brush her skin. We married in a simple ceremony on the beach 2 years ago, without great pomp, just with the people who really mattered. I look at the view outside, at the illuminated bridge against the night sky, and my mind travels back to that stormy Friday. I remember the smell of mold, the noise of the door locking, and mostly, the absolute darkness that swallowed us. It is ironic to think it was necessary to turn off all the lights so we could finally see each other for real. That dirty storage room was the womb where our new life was generated, where pain turned into healing. Allison seems to read my thoughts. She squeezes my waist and asks if I'm remembering the dead archive. I nod. She smiles and says sometimes she feels like sending flowers to Mr. Henderson, the security guard, because if he had arrived 5 minutes earlier, maybe we never would have kissed. If he had arrived 5 minutes later, well, maybe the story would have been even more intense, she jokes, with a malicious gleam in her eye that makes me laugh. The party continues lively, but we are in our own bubble, isolated by the love we built. I look at the main table, where a framed photo of us occupies the place of honor. In the photo, we are covered in paint, on the day we painted the first room of the consultancy, laughing at the camera looking tired, but immensely happy. That photo is worth more to me than any Businesswoman of the Year award Allison recently won. I turn to her and hold her face between my hands. I tell her I would do it all again. I would go through every humiliation, every overtime hour, every second of panic in the dark, just to get to this moment. Allison closes her eyes and kisses me, right there, in front of all employees and clients. It isn't a kiss of confrontation or exhibition. It is a kiss of celebration, calm and deep, of two women who no longer need to hide from anyone. When we separate, the applause of our friends echoes in the background, but for me, the sound is muffled. I can only hear her voice saying, "I love you." The storm passed a long time ago. Mr. Sterling is the past. The fear of poverty is the past. What remains is the future, bright and promising, like the sunrise over the water. I grab 2 glasses of champagne and hand one to her. We walk to the window, looking at the city lights reflecting on the sea. I raise my toast and say the final line of our story, the one that sums up everything we are and will be. To the dark that united us, and to the light we turned on. Allison touches her glass to mine, the sound of crystal clinking like a bell of victory. And so, hugged in front of the world we conquered, we live our happily ever after, day after day. Thank you for following this journey of transformation and love here on the channel. If this story touched your heart, leave your like, subscribe, and share with someone special. Until next time.